planning board. This is kind of a different format. I'm Joanne Hanson. I'm the chair. The application, whoops, John, should we put the tape on?
It is on.
Okay. The application this evening is the Paze's new house on Bar Hill. And we have feedback, but we have Rich Whitty, who's under Janet's iPad, and Portia Hinshaw, and Jay Reichgott, who is under JHR, and our counsel is Rick Golden, and Josh Lehrer has not yet joined us. Karen Arendt is the landscape architect for the application, and David, you're the engineer, and then Andy, you're the village engineer. So I think, and we have various neighbors joining us this evening. So with that, I think, Karen, it might make sense for you to orient us to the current state of the project. We know that you've been to the BZA and the bar. And I think the planning board members have had a chance to look at some of the the BZA materials. So if you could just sort of show us the plot of the property, the intended maximum building envelope, and get everybody oriented.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Can I interject 1 second, please? I think this should be tabled because we just got the notice, not from you guys, but from our friend Michael regarding this at like 3 something or 5 something today. We have not had any opportunity at all to look at these plans, these latest plans. So we are right next door and we cannot comment either yay or nay because we were not notified with enough time to be able to see these plans. So I would really like this to be tabled until we have time to look at the plans.
So I will let John speak to the notification, which I believe did come. But I would say, you know, this is a process of describing both for the planning board and for the neighbors where the application is now. This is not a final decision-making meeting. And so I don't think it's appropriate to defer it. John, do you want to speak to the notification?
Yes, all the neighbors were notified certified return receipt when this application was first presented approximately a year ago. And that's the only legal requirement that we have as far as when a building permit application is submitted. All the neighbors were also sent another certified return receipt letter approximately 4 months ago when the Pazes submitted a BZA application. So legally, you know, we have notified the neighbors that there is an active application. We're not required to notify you of every meeting. I've tried to stay in touch with some of the neighbors that I know have had concerns, but admittedly, I just as a courtesy sent out a reminder today. But legally, we have notified everybody and we've given people time to submit any comments.
We did submit some comments in response to the second notification. I don't have any recollection of the first notification, but it was a year ago. It seems as though there have been changes to the plans since our comments were submitted a few months ago. We haven't had a chance to look at these changes. And we actually, John, without wishing to be confrontational about it, we kind of think that the neighbors ought to be notified when there's a meeting.
Also, in terms of the first notice, I believe it was not sent certified, and that was the reason that the second notice was sent certified at the request of the village lawyer.
So I think this is, you know, I know Nanaya knew that you had raised questions at the BZA hearings, which I attended as an observer, and that there were some of those were addressed. Obviously, you can submit comments both to the planning board and to the bar as this process goes forward, and you'll have an opportunity to hear this evening what the current status of this application is.
Um,
Do we know what it was?
Under the misapprehension that Mike was on the board and not a neighbor, although I now understand, Michael, that you're a neighbor. I sent a quick note to him. If you're not going to postpone this meeting, we'll of course attend it, and I'll raise the question that I put to Michael innocently, equally innocently to you all in the course of the meeting.
Well, so at this point, I think we should commence the orientation of the planning board and the neighbors to where the project currently stands. And the planning board, and Rick can add to this, planning board's role here is to assess infrastructure and how the property ties into the village's infrastructure system. The maximum building envelope for the property. The bar is the organization that controls and reviews the design. The BZA has granted already various variances that will impact the project. So we are still in the middle of the stream. Rick, do you want to add to that?
I think you've said it well, but I think for people that are not used to the structure, I just let it to add some clarifying points, is that for a project like this, it appears before 3 very separate boards, separate people on them with very separate authority as to what they can and must do with respect to an application. So one, appearing before one or listening to one doesn't really help you necessarily with the application as it appears before the second board and the third board. So the what was termed the second notification was really before the Zoning Board of Appeals, which was a very separate and distinct issue as to whether or not variances should be given from the code requirements. The planning board here, as Joanne said, they have to follow the code. They can't vary the code at all. And they have to live with whatever the code as varied has been dictated by the BZA. And essentially what this board is dealing with is a site plan. There are some other aspects to it, but basically, where is this home going to be situated on the property, given the various engineering and code requirements that must be considered. And then the third board, which is very different again, is the Board of Architectural Review, which deals with the architecture of the home, lighting of the home, and other issues like that. So they all have 3 different roles. They're very different and distinct. And right now, this board is going to be, they started out with the process. There were some issues that were raised beginning of last year. The applicant then went to the Zoning Board of Appeals to try to have a home that they wanted that they couldn't under the code. And they haven't appeared before the planning board in a long time. They went to the BZA, got some variances, revised their plans recently, and now are before this board. So this board, it's the first time this board is really looking at and reviewing these plans. There will not be an approval tonight. The board traditionally, when it's ready for an approval, it doesn't take a vote right away. It asks for a resolution to be drafted by me. And then at the following meeting, they will take it up again and also consider any other input at that second and final meeting or the ultimate meeting. It could be the second or third or fourth. But that's where we are right now. So we're dealing with plans that the planning board has just recently seen and will be commenting on in the first instance, having them explained by the applicant and the applicant's representatives. I hope that clarifies some things.
If I could jump in a second, just as a matter of protocol, there is a fair bit of echo and bleed going on. So I would request that if you're not actively talking, you hit that mute button, and we'll give everybody a chance to log back, to unmute when they got something to say. And thanks.
So Karen, do you have the ability to share the screen and put the plans up?
Yes, I just need John to enable screen sharing.
It has been enabled.
Okay. I'm getting a note that the host disabled screen sharing.
No, hang on. Oh. Okay, try it now.
Okay. Now I lost you.
I will also add hard copies of the plans are available at the village office that people can go in and take a look at. It can be easier to see it in the,
Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Let me make it full screen. Okay, since we were at the meeting last, I'll explain the project a little bit for those that are new. The project was redesigned to preserve all the big copper beech trees and many of the trees around the property, including all of the trees in the rear yard, all the way from the rear yard setback to Continental Road. So you'll see where my pointer is. Well, all the plant materials shown in purple are proposed to remain. And as you can see, we kept the grading far away from the trees in order to preserve them.
Yeah. On the map.
And the project was also, we did extensive soil testing and we found great sandy soils on the site. And Dave Getz, the engineer, will speak about this, but we're mitigating all the stormwater generated on the property. And in fact, we are making the stormwater situation better. The driveway, you drive in the driveway around the circle and to a parking court. We received variances for the 2 columns out front for 6'6" in height and 2 columns near the parking area. We also received a variance for a 6-foot-high wall, but the only place you'll see the 6-foot-high wall is from the Pace's house because it is flush with the ground on the neighbor's property side. So you won't even see the wall. And the idea for that was the garages are on this side of the house, and the idea for sinking the entry to the garages in this area is to hide the garage door and the view of that side of the house from the neighboring property. Since we were before the board last, we were asked to put in a maximum buildable envelope, and that is this brown dashed line around the property, and that this will be the limits of disturbance for machinery or keeping or storage of materials or any work to be done. And this area will either be protected with tree protection fencing or siltation fencing on the downhill side. We added a lot of detail to the drawing since we were here last. We showed the columns, but these are things that the Architectural Review Board will take notice of and approve. We also show, let's see, what else should we talk about? All the materials are going to be native materials that are often found in Tuxedo Park, including a Belgian block curbing, Belgian blocks borders on the driveway. The stone walls will be granite, Tuxedo Park granite. They will be capped with either pillow top granite or a 6-inch thick bluestone. The pavement will be bluestone, except for the pool area. We didn't want to use bluestone pavement because it's too hot. So we chose a marble type of pavement that is gray in color. It looks like bluestone, but it's much less hot. I think that about summarizes it. I think Dave should speak about how we are dealing with all the stormwater and the benefits to the community that this development will actually provide.
If I could just chime in for a second. With respect to the maximum appropriate buildable envelope, it's really not just a limits of disturbance, although you have coordinated your limits of disturbance with the maximum appropriate buildable envelope. The maximum appropriate buildable envelope is there for the planning board to set, and then when it goes to the BAR, they're not allowed to move this home or any of the structures outside of that area. All right, so it can be larger than the limits of disturbance. It's really with respect to the relationship between the approvals between the planning board and the BAR as to the BAR's ability to adjust what they see here. So they would be able to move things around that are on here if it's relevant to their architectural review, but they wouldn't be able to go outside of the maximum appropriate buildable envelope. If they thought that it needed to go outside of that, you would have to come back to the planning board to get that envelope adjusted.
Karen, do you have drawing S1 handy?
Yeah, oh no, I don't have your drawing, so I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
Okay. Let's see.
While we're doing that, Rick, this is Jay. We can define that limit of disturbance as the appropriate area if we choose to, right? I mean,
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. But if, and what this board tries to do is to say essentially to the BAR, listen, we've looked at this and we think that for all the circumstances, both engineering wise, topography wise, screening wise, that this is the most appropriate place to place all of the home and the various disturbances that would go along with that, including the driveway. And so to the bar, it's like, you have to work within this envelope. Of course, if the bar says it's impossible to work with this envelope, they'd have to come back to adjust it. But this is a envelope that is the responsibility of the planning board. It's just as Karen has appropriately done, they recommend that this is what they believe the envelope should be. And then it's up to the planning board to either say yes or adjust it as however they want to adjust it.
thank you.
Would you like me to talk about the site design and drainage?
Dave, yes. And is there any way to just scale that up a little bit?
Yes, yep, I'd be glad to do that. I just wanted to show the entire property at first. The majority of the site drains toward the east, towards Tower Hill Road East. The dividing line is somewhere in that vicinity. So the majority of, I'm sorry, a small section of the road, of the property drains towards Tower Hill Road. The majority drains towards the west, towards Continental Road. You'll see as I zoom in here, we have various drainage systems proposed to collect runoff from the entire roof and almost all of the new impervious surface proposed on the site. The stormwater measures are shown in red, and they include 2 underground storage areas, one in the parking court in this vicinity, where part of the roof drainage will be directed, and all of the runoff from this portion of the driveway and parking area will be collected and sent into an underground storage area. Similarly, we have an underground storage area proposed beneath the lawn area on the north side of the house. And as Karen mentioned, we did a day of soil testing last summer throughout the proposed development area, and were happily surprised to find excellent soil conditions. We dug 7 test pits, typically going down about 8 feet or so, 8 to 9 feet, and did not hit bedrock. In a single one of those, we found well-drained sandy soils, no sign of groundwater. So that really enabled this design to collect runoff from the developed portion of the site and send it to these underground storage areas that are designed to infiltrate into those well-drained soils. We also have a surface storage area, just a slight depression in the proposed lawn that'll just add a little bit more stormwater mitigation. We prepared a report that the village engineer's office reviewed, had some comments. We addressed those, and our conclusions, which they concurred with, show that for all the storms we studied, from a relatively small storm like a 1-year event to the 100-year storm, that the peak flow from the site is reduced in both directions, towards Tower Hill Road and probably more importantly, towards Continental Road. As Karen mentioned, we've made a big effort to preserve the existing topography, the existing vegetation on that slope from the house down towards Continental Road, because we know there are concerns with drainage and potentially with erosion or sedimentation in that direction. So we feel good about our conclusions. We've incorporated several very conservative factors into them. For example, we measured a very rapid percolation rate when we tested the soils on the site, but we assumed a much slower rate just to be conservative. And even with those assumptions, we are showing reductions across the board for all those storms. Be happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
Hi, Mr. Getz, this is Hume Steyer. So we're the neighbors to the south of the Pazes.
Okay.
And if you look at the water catchment that is in the parking area, which is a few feet from our property line, if you look to the west and south of that, sort of where the compass is,
Okay.
that's the beginning of our big flat lawn, which is terraced down from the area that's directly to the south of this catchment area, which is our flat parking lot.
So in this vicinity here?
Yes.
Okay.
So my question to you, and I'm just dealing with the issue that you're addressing, is if this red box underneath the flat parking area of the Pazes parking area, which by the way is only a couple of feet from our property line, if that fills up, is the water, or maybe even if it's overtaxed by water, is the water going to spill down into our flat lawn?
No. And I'll explain why that it really cannot happen. When we design these things, we have to design for the worst case. Let's assume for some reason over time that underground basin or the soil surrounding it no longer percolate or infiltrate water into the ground. We have to check that what we've designed is going to function in a way that's safe. It's not going to flood the building. It's not going to flood your property. We need to know where that water is going to go. In this case, the elevations are set so that that would overflow back down towards Tower Hill Road,
This way.
towards the north.
Oh, that's okay. That's not Tower Hill Road. That's
Well,
not Continental Road either.
towards the driveway. It would run down the driveway and run out onto Tower Hill Road. So towards the north is the direction it would go, but the place where it would exit the site would be at the end of the new driveway.
I see.
The proposed elevation of that parking court is 680, where the existing grade is 686. That's where Karen mentioned that 6-foot high retaining wall. So even if it's filled up to the surface, it's still 6 feet below, or more than 6 feet below your property line.
Okay, I want to be clear here, Mr. Getz, and I'm not trying to argue with you. This, if you go directly to the south of the Pace's parking area into our parking area,
Yes.
true. Our parking area is elevated above their parking area.
Yes.
However, if you go west to where the compass is,
Okay.
our property falls off radically, maybe 20 feet, very steeply, down to a terraced flat lawn, which is way below our parking area
Okay.
and is essentially, I would say, 10 feet below where that red square is under the Pace's parking area. That's what I'm worried about.
Are you worried about groundwater leaving? Because surface water, these are retaining walls. These 3 walls would prevent any surface water from heading in your direction. So if your concern is groundwater, that the groundwater that could leach out of this system would enter your property, is that the concern?
Yes,
How high are the walls?
either from overflow or a leak.
So from overflow, it's impossible because those are
Block it.
those are walls and the water would be directed. Now, let me also add, we designed the volume of that underground storage area to take 100% of the 100-year storm. So it's, in my mind, it's well oversized. But again, we anticipated concerns and questions like the ones you're raising. So we wanted to make sure that we had something that's really very conservative. We have, like I said, we've assumed a slower perk rate. We've assumed all kinds of worst case scenarios, let's say. Because the soil is so sandy and gravelly, I can confidently say, I think there's no chance that water that's infiltrated at this point will end up on the ground surface on your property.
I'm concerned, frankly, not only about water on the ground surface, but also water that is underground and undermining the stability of our flat lawn. So this is a lot of water. You just told me that this red square is going to contain a huge amount of water that flows into it, not only from what falls naturally on that red square, but it's channeled into it from, lots of other places on the Pace's property. So let's assume that red square contains a lot of water after a big storm.
Okay.
The soil is permeable underneath, and I assume that it's designed to sort of, over time, allow that water to naturally drain out. And our property looks like it's above the Paces, and in some ways it is. Our house is above the Paces. But that flat lawn down there is not above the Paces. It's basically on a line with them.
Yeah.
And if, the same level as their land at that point, going north-south. And if the water is all pooling up in that red square and then leaching out, it could easily leach out towards the compass. In which case it would just end up pooling up under our flat lawn, which by the way is where we might put a swimming pool. And we put in an 11-foot retaining wall to hold up a swimming pool and other infrastructure improvements for that. And if that water all leached out in there, that would be bad. I'm not saying it would happen. I'm not an engineer and I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I'm concerned.
So I understand your concern. And if the soils had silt and clay and hard pan or bedrock layers or something that would be a barrier to the water going down vertically, I would be more receptive to your concern. I guess I don't want to sound like I'm being callous, but these soils are so well drained. When we tried to do a percolation test, we couldn't even fill the hole basically because it just disappeared straight down. So again, and when I mentioned that the red storage facility has a big volume, it's sure there's a 100-year storm is a huge event, but making the volume of the container bigger does not increase the risk on your property. It's the opposite. Making that container bigger means there's going to be more capacity before there could be any impacts somewhere else.
So I think it's appropriate at this point to allow the planning board members to ask their questions, and also the village's engineer has reviewed this, and then we can double back on questions. But Dave, as I understand it, that catchment is a physical container that holds the water, which is then
Right.
slowly
Yeah, I
dissipated.
use the word container. It's porous. It's got openings on all sides and in the bottom also. So if for some reason the soil, if there's a condition where the soil cannot release the incoming water at a rate that's fast enough, then that container will start to fill. But even during that 100-year storm, it would not overtop, even if the soil didn't take any water. And again, you'd have all that time for the water to leave.
Joanne, before you move on, it's Michael O'Neill at 212 Continental. I have the exact same concerns that Hume Steyer does as it relates to the square, as it relates to the rectangle that would flow down. I guess it would be.
Right. I mean, so I would ask you to hold also, Michael. I mean, that we're reviewing the draining now, and let's let the planning board ask questions, and then we can come back. I mean, obviously, we appreciate that there's a slope there and people don't want the water to end up on Continental. Jay, did you have any questions that you wanted to pose?
Not particularly, but based on what I've read, and let me preface this by saying I'm a structural engineer, so I know the words for this kind of drainage stuff, but it's certainly not my specialty. But based on what I've read and with concurrence of the village engineer, the stormwater system as designed will ensure that any stormwater flow off the site will not exceed and is probably going to be less than what currently happens when it rains. Is that a reasonable statement?
Yes, that's what we have in our report, and Pat Hines said he concurred with that.
Okay. That's all I got.
Portia, Josh, Rich, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Rich. On the northwest section right by Continental Road, I don't see any type of mitigation with water containers.
So we have a separate drawing that has erosion control measures shown. So during construction, there would be silt fence proposed along this whole section of the site, along the downhill edge of development. But we are not proposing any stormwater measures in that portion of the site because we don't want to disturb it, and we feel like we're handling any issues further uphill. Let me add that this stormwater measure, the stormwater storage, which collects much of the roof runoff, if that one overflows, it would be piped to a level spreader, which would release the water not at a single point, but across a 10-foot wide level release pipe. Even that is perforated. The underground pipe is perforated. So even any water that would start to leave this storage facility would have another mitigation point before it's released to the ground surface, which we didn't even factor that into our calculations. Again, we made a lot of conservative assumptions because, like you, we want this thing to function, you know, in all kinds of conditions. So for those reasons, we did not feel it was appropriate to disturb any of the lower portions of the site. And this was also discussed quite a bit with some of the other boards that were concerned about visual impacts. Karen can talk about that also, but we're proposing to leave that vegetated slope alone and handle our issues uphill of it.
And Dave, you as part of the process have done a calculation, I believe, of what the existing flows on the property are, the existing conditions.
Yes, we did. And that's a baseline that we do as a first calculation, and then we design our systems and compare the proposed conditions to those existing condition flows.
And Rick, the applicant is required under the process to not exceed the baseline position of the flows. Is that correct?
As a general proposition, but I think that it's more apt for Andy to discuss as a planning board engineer to discuss this system. I think that the neighbors are raising what are very valid issues. The applicant's engineer has responded as to their belief as to how their system would work, but ultimately the planning board is going to be guided most by the planning board's own independent engineer to determine whether or not the system is appropriate, and considering the neighbors' concerns, whether or not it should be revisited at all, or whether or not those calculations he believes are appropriate, even given the concerns of the neighbors. So I think it's probably Andy's call for explaining this, or if he thinks that he needs more information, he'll request more information.
And if I could just put it in context, as the evening progresses, we are also going to be discussing the plan for retaining the trees. I believe the bar is asked actually for additional plantings on the lower part of the property. So the two pieces do fit together, and that will be part of the evening's discussion, just so people would know where we're going. I can say that the drainage was discussed at length at the BZA, because and the village engineer, which I'm now going to turn to, did that analytical work at that time when they were before that board. So
yes, so we did review Dave's work and his report, and I don't believe we need any additional information. He's provided us with everything we needed to concur with his conclusions, which is that the system that he's designed will function as it's designed.
So Michael, do you have a specific question about how the system functions that you'd like to pose?
Yeah, I mean, just generally, I mean, how many gallons of water do these tanks hold? I guess would be the first question. And I know we talked about the long-term test. I mean, what would something like a hurricane create to the system that you've designed? I mean,
Hurricane Irene was the most severe storm, I think, in recent memory.
Mhm.
And I believe that it's somewhere, in terms of the rainfall that fell, it varies from location to location, but it was somewhere between a 50-year and a 100-year event. The precipitation depth that we used in this report, I don't have the number right in front of me. It's over 8 inches per 8 inches in depth, I believe. That would be the 24-hour depth. Hold on, I can tell you that number. Let's see.
I mean, the question is really, is it enough to keep us from having flooded basements? Because, you know, the neighbor to the south of me, who's no longer the current owner, had that situation happen with the Hanson house, right? So that's the part that we want to mitigate.
So I feel confident again that we're mitigating any impacts that this property would have. Just quickly, the 100-year storm depth that we get, and that's from national data, for this location is 8.76 inches in 24 hours, which is a huge storm. If someone nearby, downhill, uphill, has existing problems, we can't promise that this design or this construction will alleviate those. But again, I feel confident that it's not going to make those worse. And any impact that this project would have that includes this much mitigation, if it makes a difference, it'll be a benefit as opposed to making anything worse.
David, what are the dimensions of the holding tank?
Let's see. Let's see.
And while you're looking at that, John Ledwith, is it also possible that if someone wanted electronic copies of this so that they could easily get them and not have to stand in the village to pore over these plans, could they get those sent to them electronically?
Yes.
So, let's see.
Dave, while you're finding that, I guess I'll just, what I'm responding to is a cover letter that I got from Karen, actually Karen's cover letter. It says, the engineer believes the problem will be improved by the proposed site development since heavy storm runoff will be contained underground and in rain gardens instead of sheet flowing into the road, right? Sheet flowing into the road. And I'm not concerned about, of course I'm concerned with sheet flowing into the road, but what I'm really worried about is the water that's being discharged into the ground. Is that going to run downhill and impact our homes, right?
And
So-
Michael, maybe it would be useful, because I'm not sure everybody knows, specifying where your house is and in relationship to the property.
So if you can enlarge the compass,
Directly west.
I mean, it's directly west. It would be
2 and 2.
2 and 2. So it would be sort of right in the middle of where the L is on Continental.
Okay.
So the Steyrs have been discussing they're to the east there, and then I believe Chris Cummins is also on, and he's on Continental Road to the west. Just does everybody have a sense of kind of?
Joanne, we're really to the south. We're this way.
Okay,
Sorry.
Which is the left of the screen.
left, sorry.
Right, north is to the
But
right.
we're to the south. And our basement is below grade from the proposed parking area with the red square in it from for the Paises.
Yeah, it's basically on the flat. This is Lanaya Santana. It's on the same flat level lawn as the Paises house will basically be, and that area of that retaining tank or whatever it's called. That's where the flat lawn is, and our basement is directly to the left of that flat lawn.
Same level.
Same level, exactly the same level.
Okay, so let's come back to Rick's question because I'm not sure that got answered. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get people oriented to, sorry, my sense of the compass was off, but
Yeah.
Hume to the left and Michael and the Cummins to the top of the page there.
Okay.
Right.
So in terms of the volume of the storage proposed, the smaller system under the driveway, we do the calculations in terms of cubic feet. So that stores around 1,200 cubic feet. You would multiply by about 7.5. So that's around 9,000 gallons. The one in the lawn is just under 2,000 cubic feet. So roughly 15,000 gallons. So those are the volumes. The soil actually provides a lot more storage than that. So in terms of groundwater impacts, I'll just say that what we're proposing is the preferred method of stormwater mitigation, stormwater management by the DEC. I think by most reviewing agencies, they stress that subsurface infiltration is preferred. I'm confident again that the soils are so sandy that we didn't see any evidence of any area. We dug 7 test pits throughout that development portion of the site. One of them was down this far on the hill. And again, we found soils that would really promote the water to go straight down. There's no guarantee. I mean, no one can predict what happens with groundwater, but this is a tremendous site. The soil conditions are excellent for mitigating the impacts of this proposed house.
Dave,
Yeah, we
if I could just say, hi, this is
this is Dev. Yeah,
this is Devin Wilkie. Yeah, so I think it's, it seems like, because I know we've gone through this before, and it's the major concerns for all the neighbors, I think, was the water runoff. And I just, I know Dave went through everything with the village engineer, right, Dave? I mean, we had a whole a list of requests that were submitted. I think we went back and forth. I know he's had conversations with the village engineer as well, because it's been a big concern of ours, because we do want to obviously improve things, and not make things worse. This is something I know we've talked to a few other neighbors down Continental as well. And we've made a lot of changes. I just want to say one of the things that, we were talking about,
is the rear.
the rear part of the home, our initial plan was based off of the neighbors where everything was cleared out. And go ahead.
Yeah, we kept, we did take down the trees that were dead, and Karen can, also assist with this, but we kept the trees that were there that were alive and well, and we kept the vegetation as well. And this is in a large contrast to our neighbors whose backyards are fully manicured. We did this so that we could mitigate the runoff to Continental and elsewhere on Tower Hill Road. Now, Continental also runs down south. Is that correct, Dave and Karen? Like, it goes downhill from
From the east.
From the east, right?
It slopes in this direction, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's really going from south to north on this map.
Okay, so south to north. So the water there, I mean, it can come from any point on Tower Hill Road because the rear
For Continental Road.
from
yeah.
Continental, it slopes down on majority of the properties that are facing Continental.
I mean, the other thing, I mean, I think the big thing I just want to get across is, you know, obviously we've kind of gone through every request that the village engineer
And
has
that our
brought
neighbors
up
have
and
had.
that our
yeah.
neighbors have brought up through the multiple meetings we've had with the BZA. I just, you know, I just feel like Dave's repeating the same things over and over again, because it just seems like the main concern is the runoff. And I don't know, this is not what I do for a living. I rely on the, you know, the engineers and obviously the village engineer to kind of concur with these findings. So, you know, I just wanted to kind of mention that just so, because we haven't had
I
that.
appreciate that. And I think what it might make sense, and I mentioned as we started into the conversation about the drainage, that the trees and the landscaping are a component of that. So it might make sense at this stage to switch to Karen doing that discussion. I would ask please that the planning board, well, before we move on, I'll make sure that there are no other sort of immediate engineering draining questions from the planning board, but I'd like the planning board to ask their questions first, and then we can double back to the neighbors. So Karen, if you would talk about the trees, the ones that are going to be retained, if you could update us on the additions that the bar had requested, and then, you know, how that ties to the drainage situation.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so we are going to go over here to the existing, to the tree preservation plan. All the trees in purple are the ones that are being preserved. I don't have this number off on the top of my head. Let me just.
Can I just ask Karen, is there a way to, because we're not really going to be able to read the you know, specific legends, to kind of focus on the left-hand side of the screen and the site plan side of it, and less on the legend?
Okay.
Or not?
Let me see. Let me move this over. So, oops, excuse me. Sorry. I am not as proficient with this as Dave is. Let me just get the bar submission up again. Okay, so let me see if I can zoom. Okay, so we can zoom in. So we are saving, like I said earlier, we are saving 75 feet plus of vegetation in the entire rear yard. And this was specifically as responding to a request by the neighbors on Continental Road. As Dev Pays mentioned, that she preferred to make it more manicured and lawn and have it more park-like, but the as to satisfy the neighbors and to reduce visual impacts, as well as help a little bit with the drainage, we decided to save the entire rear setback, all the vegetation in the rear setback. Now I'm going to go to the landscape plan, which we recently completed, and it shows the Architectural Review Board did ask us to provide a couple of trees in the in areas where there are holes in the existing screening. So we are providing 7 green giant arborvitaes, and these are the green evergreen tree symbols. We were also asked to provide some ground covers downhill from the level spreader. So we're,
So Karen, I apologize because I think my desire to make it closer has taken the focus off the section of the site that people are really most interested, which is the lower part down towards Continental. So I guess we're going to have to go back out to the, at least what I'm looking at is mostly the house and not the lower section of the property.
that's funny because okay. So is that this better?
Still the same.
It's still the same.
See on mine, it's so-
Karen,
Karen, I think you're gonna have to remote out and remote back in. It's frozen. It's happened to
Oh,
Karen
okay.
before. Mhm.
Okay, so we'll try it one more time. Is that any better?
It is still focused mostly on the house, and we're trying to get to the
Oh,
Continentals.
that's so weird. Okay, so let me stop sharing and share again to see if that will make.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, where we started, I wanted to pull it in, but where we started was a better, and we may need to stay there because the focus is on that lower component.
Yeah. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, so I showed three, as I mentioned previously, I showed 7 green giants arborvitaes to be placed in holes in the existing screening, although there isn't many holes as you can see from some previously submitted documents. You don't really see too much of the house as it is, but just to satisfy the board, we were happy to put in the 7 green giant arborvitaes. And we're also adding a couple of grounds covers in response to one of the zoning board of appeals members. And we're going to put 150 plugs of different vegetation downhill of the level spreader to further slow the water. But by preserving, there's a lot of ground cover there already. There's a plant that's native called Carex pennsylvanica, which is like a long grass. And there's a lot of that in this area over here where the level spreader is dumping water, and that significantly slows the water. There's areas of Pachysandra. There's a lot of ground cover. So and there's no evidence of erosion as is. And since we are actually making the situation better, I think there will, the erosion potential from the existing conditions will not, there won't be any issue with erosion. And also as a request from the board, that Dave mentioned, they asked for erosion control fencing, and we're putting in 2 layers of fencing just in case something happens with the first layer, it'll be caught with the second layer. So we've also done that.
And that's on a permanent basis, or that's
no, that's just during construction, and it'll be up there until the all the ground covers grow and thicken and full, and then it'll be taken out.
So do any of the planning board members have questions about the tree maintenance, and anybody?
I'm confused about what the fencing is.
The erosion control fencing?
Yes, so that's just during construction and then it's taken
Yes,
down?
it's that, if you drive around and you see like the black fence that's held up by wooden stakes
Okay.
on new construction sites, it's there to, you put the fence in the ground a little bit so that the water has to go through the fence, leaving behind all the dirt that it collects, and it's just water, clean water flowing after that. And it's put up during construction so that the water that leaves the site is just water, and there's no soil mixed with it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't have any questions other than to say, you know, you've clearly thought through this very, very carefully and seem to have done quite a bit to mitigate any potential runoff. So
we did.
So
thank you.
If can we shift to Karen to the just a discussion of tracing around the maximum allowable building envelope. Why don't you start with that area right there, I assume relates to the erosion control fencing.
Right. So the erosion control fencing will be right in here, and all these trees will remain. There are trees along the side yard that are proposed to remain, like I said, all the purple trees, this big, beautiful, I think it's 40-something inch copper beech will be preserved along with the beech trees along the Tower Hill Road. In addition to the existing trees and pockets where there would be possibly views into the site from the neighboring property to the south, we are adding screening, 2 layers, a deciduous flowering tree, eastern redbud, as well as green giant arborvitaes to provide thick screening so that both the paces don't see the neighbors and the neighbors don't see the paces, unless they want to. So, and then on the other side, we're also providing screen planting in addition to planting around the swimming pool and planting in the front of the house to soften the views of the home from the road and just to provide a lot of curb appeal for the project.
In the courtyard, what's the depth from the wall to the property line there?
Over by the neighboring property. On the
Right,
south,
yeah, where you're.
There's 10 feet to the wall. There's 10 feet, and then the wall is 2 feet. So it's about 12 feet to the pavement edge. And in that 10 feet, I purposefully made we actually got the zoning variance so that we could raise the height of the wall to provide more planting space and higher level of planting to provide screening for the neighbor. We didn't actually need that variance for the 6-foot high wall because we could have sloped right to the property line, but we wanted to be able to provide adequate, decent screening. So we asked for and received the variance. And in the beginning, when we first asked for the variance, I was concerned that there could be rock and that we wouldn't be able to get any screening in there. And then after that, we found that the soils were so great and there wasn't rock, and we still decided that we would keep our variance application in so that we would have a nice level area to plant all those green giant arborvitaes and also another layer of plants that are going to weep over the wall.
And
I'm
John, sorry.
Go ahead.
Who's, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Hume, I'm sorry.
Who's asking? Are we on planning board people?
No, I'm first. I'm the neighbor, but go ahead.
John, can you just address the question about the pathway?
Yes, Karen, we're concerned that there's really no defined width of the pathway. And we're also concerned it's really beyond the limit of disturbance. It's not included. What's the real reason for the pathway?
So the Pace thought that they would like to be able to walk down to the Continental Road, and it was just a mulch path. So there's really going to be no disturbance. We're just gonna, I guess there's a little disturbance in the fact that there wouldn't be any vegetation, but it's basically following, you could see it's following contour lines.
Yes.
So it was just, the Paces, wanted to be able to walk down to the road down below, and they thought maybe their children would like to walk down. So we were just providing a path for that.
And Rick, would that typically be included in the limits of disturbance?
It has to be put in the limits of disturbance because you're going to be disturbing the area there in order to put down whatever kind of material that you want to put down, whether it be chips or whatever, to create a path. Otherwise, you can't touch it at all. That's the whole purpose of a limit of disturbance.
Even if it's hand done?
Excuse me?
Even if it's just done by hand?
Yeah, it's still disturbed. It doesn't matter whether you go with a
So
shovel or you go with
so
a
I
vac-
need to put the limit of disturbance around all the trees as well. All the plantings as well.
When you're putting new trees, it is understood that you're going to get to the trees and back out again. but this is not something that's temporary. This
Okay.
is something that,
So, I mean, we're happy to include that in the limits if that's acceptable to the board.
Yeah, I think to define it and to I mean, ultimately the landscaping review is really in conjunction with the bar. But
Right.
the limits of disturbance are in this board's domain. And so I think to define the width of the intended path and you know, to revise the maximum building envelope to reflect the path. Because it is a permanent feature.
and also so that it can be clear as to what is being approved and what can be enforced from John's point of view. You need, and for the planning board in the first instance to accept it, is that you would also have to show what kind of material is going to be put down there. You're talking about wood chips, or you're talking about,
Yes, well, it says wood chips right on the
Okay.
drawing. So I can show a 4-foot wide path and we'll show the limits of disturbance around it. No, we have no problem with that.
and the maximum appropriate buildable envelope, because all
Yes.
disturbance should be
I
within.
mean, not the, yes, we'll include that within the maximum buildable envelope.
While we're on the limits of disturbance, first of all, the maximum appropriate buildable envelope should be noted on the site plan. You have it noted on a different one, I think
The village zoning plan, yes.
yeah. So it's not wrong to have it there, but you need to have it as well on the site plan. That's
Okay.
required by the code. The other thing, Karen, is that on limits of disturbance that you do have on the site plan, I believe it's a dashed blue line. It indicates that it's TYP, which typically means typical. This has to be a hard line. It can't be that it's just typical and you may go outside of that for disturbance. It needs to be the limits of disturbance.
Okay,
So take out the typical, and if you need to adjust it in order to cover an area that you're concerned about as far as having some wiggle room, then put it where you think it is and the planning board will review.
And it will reflect areas where, I mean, you know, we recognize obviously when you're doing construction, there's a staging area around the house, so it needs to pick up that area.
okay, we can make that. We'll distinguish between the limits of disturbance and the maximum buildable envelope, because we have them both together, both as one. So we will show the different.
So are there other questions?
Yes, Joanne,
No, wait, let me get my planning board folk in here, please. Are there any other questions from the planning board concerning the maximum building envelope or the tree plan? We're gonna double back to the engineering side of things.
Yeah, this is Jay. I have a question about green giant arborvitae. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them by any means, because like, again, that's even less of my area of expertise. But we've got these giant rats with horns, half of them. And is that really deer resistant?
So it's not, it's on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being the most resistant, it's 2. And since in many places, the deer don't touch it, sometimes they do touch it. So there's really no large evergreen except for blue spruce. That is a number 1. Norway spruce is also, but I didn't want to use anything that grew so fat and huge. And the blue spruces aren't doing so well now because they get Cytophthora and they die within 20 years. They're actually starting to die at 10 years old. So we're only left with Norway spruce. So that's the reason why green giants are chosen. And they are number 2, and they have not been, in the past in Tuxedo Park, they have not been browsed, with the exception of some of the properties that are closer to the wood, closer to the edges. And that would be something the Paces would have to have winter fencing put up. to protect them. The deer only browse them in the winter. So you can put up the temporary deer fence every winter and take it down in the spring.
Thanks. Like I said, I'm not objecting. I just,
Okay.
most arborvitae is deer candy, so.
Yeah, the other ones are like the dark American arborvitae and the emerald greens. They're all candy. They're number 4 as being the deer favorite, or I should say, I should have reversed the numbering system. They're the deer favorite, but not the green giants. It's a completely different species.
And Josh, you had a question?
No, I just was going to let you know that I didn't have any questions.
Okay. So Rick, could you discuss how the applicant should memorialize the tree plan? We're aware that this was part of the extensive BZA discussion, and it is coming back to the planning board to memorialize the maintenance of the trees.
Sure. I was reading the BZA decision, and I don't know if there was more than one, but the one I was reading didn't have any conditions concerning the preservation of trees there or the supplementation of the trees in that area. But I understand from you, Joanne, that there were discussions along those lines, but it was not a specific condition of the BZA.
Yes, it is not a formal piece of the, I mean, they were not variances for which they came, but it was part of the discussion, and the Hazes have made reference to that. There were a number of BZA meetings in which both the trees and the drainage were discussed at length.
Understood. I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah,
wasn't.
thank you. You're the lawyer.
No. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something by which there are specific conditions that I was unaware. So the way that we have normally handled this in the planning board, where there's a certain area in which, in addition to the code restrictions on what you can and can't remove with respect to trees, et cetera, to have an area that is designated as important for purposes of the approval, obviously you need to protect that, not only for this homeowner, but for all future homeowners. So the way you do that, and the way that the planning board has done that in the past, is to identify an area that will end up to be described and listed as a covenant, as a deed restriction that will run with the land, which will indicate that no trees can be taken down other than dead or dying. And we have very particular aspects within that. In fact, we did one with Mr. Whitty with respect to an approval he had a number of years ago. There are, as I counted, at least 3 trees that will be coming down. Is that correct, Karen, in that area?
I don't have that exact figure. I can, while you're talking, I'll look it up.
Okay, I think on another drawing, there were 3, if we're talking about between the rear setback and the west property line along Continental Road. So what will happen, and David, I imagine that either you or someone you will ask will do this, we will need the area to be surveyed. It shouldn't be very difficult because 3 of the sides are already surveyed. And then you just go somewhere along, probably not exactly the rear setback line because it's a little irregular. So I would think you would draw a fairly straight line in or about that rear setback line from north to south, and then survey that line and then tie it into the other 3 surveyed lines. Am I making myself clear, David?
So you want meets and bounds?
Yes, we will need that in order to have it filed with the county as a covenant deed restriction. And so we will need a meets and bounds for that description. So that's the way that we protect it. And if there are 3 trees, and I think there was, I know Karen's going to check on it.
Okay, I will get that figure.
But I believe that the one that I have, that you have, were trees numbers 118, 119, 123, I guess is the 4th tree, 168 maybe, And then there was 164 that was right on the rear yard setback. So I don't know, depending upon where you're going to draw that line from north to south, that may be in there as well. But whatever trees are within that area, then those will stay the way they are. They cannot be taken down except under certain circumstances for health and safety, disease trees, things like that.
Hi, so Rick and Karen, I guess this is news to us. You know, we, in the last BZA meeting, we gave our word that we would, you know, cut down the trees, but what is, if you can explain the deed restriction?
Sure. Your word is fine, but you're not going to be there potentially in 20, 30, 100 years. And so the protection that this puts on it is for all future landowners. And it's been done with other planning board applications in the past where there's an important feature that the planning board is saying, yes, because you're agreeing to do this, we think it's appropriate and we'll give you an approval. But we have to have a mechanism by which the protected area upon which that approval is based in part needs to stay that way. So that some future property owner doesn't come in and just bulldoze the whole area.
And Rick, it's Josh Shura. What are the repercussions for non-compliance?
Well, it would be a zoning violation, one. Also that neighbors would have the ability to enforce that deed restriction. So it would be both a zoning violation as well as neighbors, if they wanted to, could enforce it by way of a private right of action between them and whoever the property owner is at the time.
Quick question, I guess Rick or Karen, because one of the things you mentioned, Rick, is they granted the variance upon that condition. Is that something that's in the resolution, or is that something? What would the is that something that was mentioned in the resolution from the BZA? Or Karen, are you aware?
It was not in the resolution from the BZA. This would be a determination by the planning board that this area, what's being represented is we're not going to take down trees in this area. That's what's being represented.
Yeah.
All it does is have a mechanism to enforce that representation.
Yeah, no, I just was asking because I thought you mentioned that the variance was granted based upon that contingency of like not.
No, I said something very different than that. I said it when I looked at it, I didn't see any condition that it was based upon that. However, I understood from discussions with Joanne that there were discussions along those lines, that that was important, and there were representations made, although it wasn't part of the BZA decision.
Okay.
Rick, there's 5 trees that will be taken down in that area. And I can
Okay,
give
well,
you the number.
those are the ones that you have listed in red, and I think it'll be clear, and we'll be putting in that deed restriction as to which trees are the ones that can be taken down.
Okay.
I gotta say that a deed restriction that never lets anybody make any changes to the vegetation on their property starts to sound like it borders on unreasonable taking. I think that it convinced me otherwise, but if that was not specifically a condition of the variance, I'm not sure why we're adding to it.
Well, first, it's if you're talking about a legal taking, it's not a legal taking. Just as a matter of law, it's not a legal taking. Now, that doesn't mean that this board could say, I don't think we need to require it. And I don't really care whether or not people come in and take down trees. But that's what this board has to decide. It wasn't a condition of the BZA. This would be a decision of the planning board. If the planning board says, you know, we'd like to have those there, but if you take them down, you take them down. Or if your next owner takes them down, they take them down. It's not important to us in our planning board approval, our site plan approval, then there's no reason for a deed restriction. But if in fact you believe that it's important for purposes of screening, for purposes, which is part of your site plan issues as to how this property deals with neighboring properties, screening and other things, if you think it's important for that and for drainage and everything else, that's why you do it. But if you don't think it's important, either for drainage or you don't think it's important for visual aesthetics, then you could not have it restricted and they would have the ability to take down all of the trees consistent with the code as it stands now, which I think John can tell me, but I think it's 4 trees a year. So you simply take down 4 trees a year and over the course of time, it could be denuded.
We think it's
Right, so,
absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, like you said, there are restrictions, I think, to the number of trees you can take down a year. And, you know, to our point, to be very frank, just as a fairness issue, because I'm just curious to see with the neighbors' properties to the left and to the right of us, how many trees are currently there, how many trees were currently taken down. And it just seems, from our point of view, it's unfair to us to be tied into something like that. We have no intention of taking things down, but to have it in there, you know, as a restriction of some sort, it's something we'd obviously have to consider for ourselves as well.
If I could say.
We think absolutely
No,
critical.
hold on, Chris, let me pause. As part of, you know, I was merely an observer in the BZA proceedings, but there were extensive conversations about 2 things. One was the drainage and the role that the trees play in that. And Chris Cummins is about to comment that there was also a fair bit of discussion, and my understanding was agreement about screening your property from the downhill neighbors. Chris, do you want to add to that?
Yes, absolutely. It was agreed within the BZA that it would be sent to the planning board, but we brought it up that we were interested in maintaining the trees and have it written into either the permit for the home or somehow to memorialize it with a deed restriction. And that was agreed at the time, and that was our understanding. And we're still looking to have it codified in some way. So yeah, we're still very concerned with that.
I would like to ask a question to Rick, if it's possible that somehow to write the requirement that the project is screened rather than tying the phases into leaving trees, you know, these existing trees, because they might look terrible in, you know, 10 years. Some of them look terrible already and we're leaving them there to provide screening. But if there's other trees that grow up and take the place and the screening's provided, it would be great if the PACE could improve their property and not look at these ugly trees that are in the foreground for them. So if they provided like 20 feet of screening and it's thick and dense along Continental Road, I don't see the necessity for them to provide another 50 feet of trees that look terrible. And they, just for the board to know, the trees aren't what it helps with drainage. It's more of the ground covers that slow the velocity of water as it's running down the hill. So it's more for screening than the tree retention of the existing trees are more for screening. And if the Paises wanted to put a thick evergreen band of trees down by Continental Road, and in 20 years, they're thick and dense, it would be a shame that they have to keep the ugly hemlocks that are full of woolly adelgid and some of the invasive trees that are there in the foreground.
All
I mean, I would raise, oh, go ahead, Rick.
First of all, you know, lawyers can craft just about anything, just like engineers could just about build anything. It just takes either money or, in my case, words. So yes, something else could be crafted. What I had heard was that the applicant was willing not to remove the trees between the rear yard setback and Continental Road. I had heard that twice already tonight, represented. This was just a mechanism to enforce that representation. Now, can it be done to make sure at some time in the future, if there is adequate screening, that it can be changed? The answer is yes. You could come back to, at that point, they can come back to the planning board and ask for a modification to the planning board, and that deed restriction based upon that sort of set of facts you talked about, and they could say that now there's sufficient screening, so now you can remove X number of trees that otherwise were restricted under that. But it's up to the planning board. This was a representation that I heard. And when I hear representations made and then planning board members rely upon those representations in order to give an approval, it seems not very wise to have a process whereby that representation could simply be turned around in a whisper, either by this particular owner later on when they change their mind or a subsequent owner. And so this is simply a way to.
Rick, can I ask a question? So it sounds like that area is being preserved at the request of the neighbors. And so I have a question. Was that, and unfortunately I'm new to the situation, so I don't have a lot of the history with the BZA and this project, but was that a request born out of a desire for screening or runoff? Because what I'm hearing is that the trees don't do a lot with respect to runoff. So I'm just trying to understand where this came from and, you know, what the basis of the representation was. Because obviously the pays are trying to mollify their neighbors, and I just want to make sure that we're achieving the actual objectives of the neighbors.
So I think it was a combination of both, even though the Dave's plans indicated that the trees would do nothing to help with the runoff because it's already been addressed. Some of the neighbors still wanted and felt comfortable having the trees there, you know, for screening purposes, but also in their minds it would have helped with the runoff as well. But again, I think the main concern was screening and the view. We you know, at the BZA meetings we did 3D renderings and showed the view coming from Continental lot because they were concerned about how much of the property they would see. So I think the screening was the main concern. And the one thing I just also want to add, you know, that is our intention to obviously keep the trees in there, but to have a deed restriction on our property as a matter of principle, dictating what we can and can't do and what we're locked into, to me, again, doesn't seem fair. And that's why it's a concern of ours.
Rick, is it public comment? This is Sherry Bishko. I'm with Chris. We're at 222 Continental. Is it permissible for me to speak now or should I wait?
That's up to the chair.
I was, can you wait one second? Hi. Obviously, as I say, I attended as an observer the BZA discussions, and you know, you Karen put up the screening to address Sherry and Chris's concerns. I don't know if Michael shares those same concerns, but it, you know, it was something that was reviewed at some length. So my thought would be, if in fact you would rather deal with this by a evergreen screen along Continental Road versus the existing trees, I think it makes sense to flush that out now while the project is under consideration by the various boards, rather than something that evolves over time.
Can I interrupt there? Because I mean, I don't know how the process, we're going from the BZA, which, you know, we were at a number of meetings, and my understanding in leaving the BZA meetings were that we weren't going to revisit a screening methodology of trees. We were leaving the existing trees. I requested numerous times that this be memorialized in a permit or the deed. And our thoughts are twofold. I mean, I disagree on runoff. I think they are addressing runoff up top, but runoff is also addressed by roots and trees at the bottom of the hill. I don't think that you can really argue that. It's going to help. It may not be the end all be all with regard to runoff, but it's certainly going to help. Additionally, you know, I understand your concern about not being hamstrung by what you can and can't do with your property. However, the house next door to you, my understanding was, had no restriction. They had the similar woods or ground cover and trees when they did renovations on their house that were clear cut after a short time. So I mean, I'm vociferous. I am very much in favor of this being memorialized. I mean, what would prevent you from cutting the trees down? And I'm not saying you're going to, but at the next owner. Additionally, it's not putting up evergreens as a screen. There are fox and deer and all kinds of wildlife, bears that bed down, and we watch them out of our window. It's, you know, it's in moving this project forward from the BZA to the planning board. This was something that I was assuming we were agreed to. So if we're reverting or going back, that's upsetting.
We're not reverting on going back. And two is, you know, I appreciate the concern of, you know, the view that the neighbors had, you know, prior to this lot being purchased. But the fact of the matter remains, you know, we did purchase it with the intention of building a home on there. So, you know, some of the concerns that, you know, the neighbors have brought up with regard to watching X, Y, and Z and the, again, it just, to me, you know, I'll say the same thing I said before. It's a matter of principle. It's a matter of fairness. You know, as to somebody putting a deed restriction on a property that we own, you know, what kind of, you know, it's something that, I mean, like I said, you have to.
Well, I mean, you know, it's interesting because at the BZA meeting, it was.
I just don't know what the legal issues and the legality of it is, and if it's something how widespread it's been, and you know, it's just, you mentioned what the neighbors did, you know, and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
I mean,
Well, if I could I'm just going to intersperse here for a second. I'll let Sherry, both of you. But as I say, as an observer, my understanding was that both for drainage and screening reasons, that there was, it appeared, a meeting of the minds at the BZA board meetings, not specifically related to their variances, but in the course of the conversations. So I think as an observer, my understanding was where Sherry is, that was something that was agreed upon. And therefore it has to be memorialized in some fashion or another. It is not a case of just neighborly goodwill. So then the question becomes, what is the appropriate memorialization? I would, you know, I think Rick has indicated it can be done any number of ways, but I think that there needs to be some kind of formal acknowledgement of the expectations vis-a-vis the maintenance of the trees and the.
If I may, I think you're correct, and I think that something needs to be memorialized. I also think it's important that we understand what it was that the BZA was looking for when they, or what they thought they were looking for. It seems if the issue is making sure that runoff is properly controlled, that's an issue of stormwater management, which we've already covered. And there are very specific rules about what can and cannot happen with stormwater, but the exact mechanism of that is left up to the stormwater design, which we're going to approve or disapprove of. If the other issue was screening, then I don't see any problem with memorializing a requirement for appropriate screening, however that's going to be defined. But appropriate screening has to do with view corridors and things like that, and not specific trees. And I think that I got to say, I agree with the homeowner on this one. To have a requirement for appropriate screening that allows them the flexibility to achieve that seems reasonable. And, you know, deer and bear and all the rest of it are lovely, but not necessarily at the foot of your own property. And this wasn't purchased as a nature preserve. It was purchased as a building site.
Okay, I'm hearing you. Procedurally, I guess that's what Rick needs to advise us on. If we had one understanding under the BZA discussion and them moving this project forward, I'm just incredulous that now we're going back to what we had numerous discussions on.
Well, Joanne came away with the same opinion that we had, that it had been agreed upon, BZA, that this was to occur.
And I sat in on all those meetings as well, and I would concur with Joanne and Chris and Sherry. That's what we agreed upon. And I believe the reason that we talked about memorializing these specific trees was a point that Karen brought up related to disrupting this area. So it wasn't about coming in with new screening, but it was keeping the existing tree structures, vegetation in place to mitigate the runoff, as well as provide protection from the neighbors on Continental Road looking up at the house.
I would just want to clarify, the trees do not provide runoff protection. I will clarify that. It's the things that grow underneath on the ground that provides more of the runoff protection. But the idea of leaving the trees is because they are existing and they're full and they're nice and tall and full grown. Not full grown, there are obviously a lot of smaller trees in there, but they do provide existing screening. The memorializing the trees is not taking the exact trees, is not taking into consideration the lifespan. Like what about all the hemlocks that die? We could just let them all die. I mean,
Oh, okay, I'm amenable to, as they die, replace them. I mean, but I don't.
But I think it's like, I think that the client or the applicant should have a little flexibility so that they don't have to be tied. There's some even invasive trees, like.
Just on this call alone, Rick put
And they are there for screening, and they are providing.
Hold on,
screening.
Michael.
And it's a thick swath of vegetation. I think that it's difficult to require somebody to just keep all the trees.
Well, I think as Rick said, attorneys can do anything, and let's see what we write in the deed or the permit. I mean, what are we including this language in? Which would give some flexibility, but would ultimately require the same screening, if you will. I mean, Kevin took a picture from my backyard, my front yard, and put that, or you did, you took the picture. And we looked, and Kevin said, see, if we keep all of this, this is the view you will get. So my assumption is that view will continue. And how we do that is a creative, we have to be creative.
We are all for the screening aspect, and to what Jay said, I agree 100%. I mean, that's fine. That we'll make sure that view stays the same. The screening we're totally fine with that. I think it's just a deed restriction where it's telling us what trees can and can't come out and what we do on our property and how we manage it. I think that's so the issue we have with, because again, it's been established by the professionals, not what I think, not what, any layperson thinks, but by the professionals, which is Dave and Karen and the village engineer, who concur that this really has nothing to do with the runoff. More has to do with the screening aspect on there. That stuff I think has been talked about endlessly, and I hope everyone is satisfied with that aspect. But
well, I don't know that I've heard Andy say that the tree cover has nothing to do with stormwater. I'd be surprised if it has nothing to do with stormwater. Certainly,
let me tell you,
trees have something to do with stormwater.
Sometimes the trees shade the ground and especially with deer, create the bare earth areas. So sometimes, quite often, trees do the opposite by not allowing plants to grow.
Right, we're not talking about
underneath.
hypothetical. We can ask Andy whether or not there is any good effect that the present stand of trees have with respect to stormwater and going down
Rick,
the.
if I may, the requirement for the, you know, from what I understood was our objective. And again, Kara, I don't know if Dave is still on here, but you know, our objective was, you're asking a question to say, well, is the trees gonna help with certain things? Our goal, I believe, was that we're not supposed to make the conditions worse with what we're doing. And I believe if we're showing that we're not making the conditions worse with what we're doing, and improving things, if anything, you know, which I believe is what the conversations Dave and Pat had. I don't, is Dave still on, Karen?
Yes, I am.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Dave, you know, if you don't mind, just kind of, yeah, because it's this runoff thing keeps, you know, coming up again. Isn't that true? Isn't our objective to keep things the status quo with what we're doing and not make things worse?
Well, and as you mentioned, make them better when we have the opportunity. The way we modeled this site was to leave that portion of the property unchanged from existing to proposed conditions. I agree with Karen that any condition that's going to make bare earth is going to create potential worse additional runoff. But a vegetated area, whether it's trees or ground cover, is going to be better than if it was paved or bare earth.
Dave, if I could just ask one other question. I mean, if that area was fully, I'm just curious, fully manicured lawn area, would that affect the runoff situation in a negative way? You know, as to the way things are with the collection system that we have here?
No, if it's a thick stand of grass, if it's really going to slow the water down, provide for infiltration, it would be very similar to a wooded condition. It wouldn't make it worse.
I'm confused here. Are we jumping to grass? I mean, I thought we were
No.
way past that.
I'm just trying to make the I'm just trying to make the point. I'm just trying to make the point to what Rick was, you know, to some of the concerns that were brought up and to what Rick mentioned as well with asking if this is going to help things. But, you know, I just, the collection system is addressing the runoff, whether there are trees there or whether there are trees not there, whether, you know, depending on how it's manicured. That was the main point I was trying to get across.
However, this is the board at which the resolution of how, both for drainage and screening, how that's maintained. And it's been our experience that it, you know, simply well, we intend to do something does not translate well into the future. So I would ask you, you know, what is your intention here? How can we, for the benefit of the neighborhood, and as I say, these discussions went on before the BZA, not in front of this board, but it was, I think that an agreement on screening in some form was reached. And so then before this board, we have to figure out, how do we memorialize that?
I have an idea. If we quantify the number of diameter breast height of all the evergreens and quantify the diameter breast height of all of the deciduous trees, if that's memorialized, that they have to maintain that number of diameter breast height of, does anybody understand what I'm saying? Like you see my tree list of inventory has each tree categorized in accordance, whether it's evergreen or deciduous, and the number of diameter, how thick the tree is. And if the applicant agrees to maintain that level, the same number of inches in diameter breast height of deciduous trees for screening, and the same number of inches of evergreen trees for screening, then I think that would be a fair way to do it.
So you're
Right, but it
saying,
would,
And
yeah, but just to play devil's advocate, what if they move all of them like to one side of the property and then create a lawn? I mean, I think it has to be.
Evenly dispersed throughout the 75-foot area or something like that. I know that a lot of towns require the same number of calipers to be kept on properties, and that's how they make sure that the existing trees, at least the existing trees are perpetuated. In other words, like, I think that's almost stronger than just leaving these existing trees to be memorialized, because if they die, I guess they would have to be, I don't know if they'd have to be replaced, but at least there's some measure, some way to measure.
I think I think that something like that is probably a reasonable approach. I'm speaking for myself, not the rest of the board members, of course. But I think that that's exactly it. The intention is to provide screening. Then let's quantify what an appropriate level of screening is and find a way to memorialize that, which allows people to deal with the nature of trees, which is they grow and they die and they change. And, you know, you really wouldn't want to require that this be lined with American elms or white ash, or, you know, dogwoods, because all of them are going to be gone in 5 years or 15 years. So I think something that allows some flexibility for the homeowner while protecting the screening needs of the neighbors is the way to go. Like
obviously everyone else can comment, but that seems like a reasonable compromise that it provides flexibility while maintaining the agreement.
I agree. I think in principle, it does sound like it could do the job. I guess enforcement would be tough, but I don't know how we'd address that.
How are you planning on addressing keeping all the trees as they currently stand? That's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer.
Yeah.
So Karen, why don't you confer with the applicant and come back
We're fine with, you know, I just want to say we're completely okay with that. It is memorializing the screening aspect. So you know, we're fine with that. We have to figure out, you know, I'm not sure how we go about doing that. I'm not sure how that happens.
So we were looking, we can go over this, but we were gonna count all the trees within the area, the 75-foot area, the number of inches of the trees that are there at diameter breast height, and then you will be required to maintain that amount of deciduous trees and that amount of evergreen trees.
And ground cover as well, to keep a similar look with the ground cover, because it kind of fills in. I think that's really important.
Well, they'll have to keep the ground cover just so that nothing erodes. So,
Okay.
I mean, we can.
So that'll be there as well. You'll have some language on ground cover.
Yes, well, yes, we'll put language in about ground cover.
So that is back in Karen and the applicant's hands for the moment. I think we should come back to Andy and well, let me, before I move back to engineering. Ooh, sorry, terrible feedback here. Josh, Portia, Rick, sorry. Anybody got any questions on where we were on the trees?
no, I think this is a good resolution.
Okay, so I'd like to come back to Andy. I believe that these drainage issues have been reviewed and discussed questions were raised, and there was a dialogue and response back and forth between the village engineer and the applicant's engineer. And Andy, can you just speak to, my understanding is that the village engineering assessment is confident about the drainage of the property.
Yes, we are.
Planning
Yeah,
board
they-
members, any further questions on that?
Sorry, they satisfied our, all of our concerns with, you know, Dave answered questions and we reviewed his report.
So I think that and the drainage ground has been covered. I think where we are now is that the applicant is going to be revising the maximum allowable building envelope, clarifying on the path, clarifying on the trees, and then we will get back together to review those issues. Rick, John Ledwith, any of the planning board members want to add anything?
No, I don't have anything at this time.
The one thing I want to understand is I think substantively, we have an agreement, at least in principle so far from the planning board, as to the type of protection there should be in that the Continental Road area of the property between Continental Road and the rear yard setback. And that's fine, rather than just saying everything has to be protected. We're going to have this maintaining the number of the DBH, the present evergreen and deciduous presently existing, but and dispersed in a similar pattern, including natural ground cover. But it allows flexibility to go ahead and adjust that as long as that metric is maintained. But it still needs an enforcement mechanism. So I still think that the deed restriction is the way to do that. It's just, that's what we described. What the restriction is that they have that flexibility with respect to maintaining the screening in the manner that we've discussed. But I still would need that area surveyed so that it can be included in a deed restriction. And just so that you know, with respect to the deed restriction, if you just have it as a condition in a resolution, that's going to bind this owner. But it will not bind a subsequent owner who's unaware of that condition, and they're not legally required to go searching for that condition. If it's in the chain of title, as deed restrictions are, then it's binding on all subsequent purchasers. And that's why I believe that it's important, if it's important to you to keep this screening, then it's important to do it by way of a deed restriction rather than just a condition in the resolution.
So Rick, I have a question about that. So if you don't make it a condition and you make it part of the permanent deed, you know, what's really interesting about planning for the future, and in this case, it seems like we're planning for forever. There must be some mechanism to adjust that restriction. And I want to understand what that is, because it could be that the entire community agrees that what we're agreeing to today makes absolutely no sense. And I just want to understand what the mechanism is for unwinding that.
We could build into the deed restriction that the owner of the property at any time may seek a modification of that deed restriction by way of a modification to the site plan approval.
Okay, well, I suggest we do that, because I can't believe that we know what 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from now is really going to bring us.
I just also want to add, just, you know, as a matter of record, this is something we definitely have to look into more. We need to, talk to legal professionals, just get some more advice further on these things. We don't want to be tied into something that we know we don't know a whole lot about, because there's implications for us as well for many, many years to come. So, it's something we'll definitely look into and talk to Karen about and go from there.
And I would also suggest, I don't know when you're next scheduled before the bar, but to have that conversation about what the landscaping that you intend to do, so that both the planning board and the bar are on the same sheets of music to whatever we're going to memorialize. So with that, I think we've covered the topics for the evening, and we look forward to meeting with you again as we work to complete this process.
I have one other, am I muted here? No, not.
Nope, you're on.
Thank you. I had one other small thing. And it had to do, Karen, with I think it was the limits of disturbance, but also the maximum appropriate buildable envelope. It looks like down near Tower Hill Road, it looked like there's a retaining wall that's outside of both the limits of disturbance and maximum appropriate buildable envelope. So I think it may have to be adjusted around there, a little jog around the retaining wall by the circular part of the driveway.
Is that an existing wall, Karen?
That's the existing wall, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. My apologies.
Okay.
So we're all set?
And Joanne, can I bring up one thing? Is that
Okay.
Of all of the 22 comments that we had in our engineering review, all have been satisfied thus far.
What was
So
the
there-
date of that, Andy?
Say that again?
What was the date of that last review that you just referenced?
Our original comments were from 8th of January, 2020. So we had 22 comments, and the last 3 were resolved today, actually, with additional information that were provided or was provided by Karen and by David.
Thank you. So I want to wish everybody, hopefully 2021, it's certainly turbulent, but hopefully it starts out, it gets better from 2020. And we look forward to all working together to complete this process and welcome the Pays with their new home to Tuxedo. So with that, thank you everybody for your time and attention, and we'll continue on.
We need a motion to adjourn.
That would be a good idea. Thank you. I keep, the Zoom throws me off. May I have a second, please, on that, or first?
Second.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.